I was 17 the first time someone told me I'd never be rich. Not in a calm, thoughtful way. No, they laughed. Like really laughed. The kind that echoes in a school hallway and follows you for years. It was career day at East Hickory High, and while everyone else stood up talking about being lawyers, engineers, or nurses, I stood there shaky voiced and said I wanted to build my own business. They asked me what kind. I said I wasn't sure yet, but I loved the idea of creating something from nothing, a bakery maybe, or a little online shop. I just knew I didn't want to beg for a paycheck my whole life. And that's when it happened. Heather Collins, my childhood friend turned tormentor, rolled her eyes and muttered just loud enough for the room to hear, Ava can't even afford lunch. She thinks she's going to be rich? The whole class erupted. Some of them were kids I'd known since kindergarten. Even Mr. Pollard, our economics teacher, smirked like it was a punchline. I remember gripping the paper in my hand so hard my knuckles went white. I didn't cry. I just stood there, stared back at them, and smiled. The kind of smile you give someone right before a war begins. It wasn't just that moment. It was the years leading up to it. My mama cleaned houses. My daddy, I don't remember much about him, just that he left when I was 6 and didn't look back. We lived in a 2-bedroom trailer with a busted heater and a leaky roof. I wore secondhand jeans with patches my mama sewed by hand and shoes with soles so thin I could feel the gravel. Heather knew that. All of them did. I was the girl who paid for school lunches with quarters and walked 3 miles home because we couldn't afford gas. The girl who showed up to school smelling like bleach some days because I helped my mama clean apartments after hours. But that day, the laughter, the heat in my chest, the shame, it did something permanent to me. You know that saying, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger? Well, sometimes it makes you sharper, colder, focused. I went home that night, sat on our worn out couch, and wrote the words they said in my journal, "You'll never be rich." Then I underlined it twice. I didn't know how I'd do it yet or when, but in that exact moment, I made a quiet vow. One day, I'd prove them all wrong, not by arguing, not by begging for respect, but by building something they couldn't ignore. And when I did, I wasn't just going to get rich. I was going to make them remember every word. When I left East Hickory at 19, I didn't have much. A duffel bag full of thrift store clothes, a half-dead phone, and $284 in cash from working double shifts at a diner. My mama cried at the door of our trailer, handing me her last 20 like it was sacred. For emergencies only, Ava, she whispered, like she knew I'd be facing more than I could carry. I told her I was headed to Nashville. I had no real plan, just the idea that cities had opportunity and that small towns like ours only bred gossip and limits. I figured I'd wait tables, maybe enroll in community college if I could swing the paperwork. But life, as it always does, had other plans. The first week, I stayed at a cheap motel on the edge of the city. By the fourth night, I'd eaten through most of my savings rent, gas, 2 cheap meals a day. Jobs were harder to come by than I thought, especially with no degree and no references. I applied everywhere: diners, retail, call centers. Some said I was too young. Others said they'd call if anything opened up. No one ever did. When the motel finally kicked me out for non payment, I had a choice: call mama and admit I'd failed, or find another way. I chose the latter. I parked behind a 24-hour laundromat with tinted windows and stayed quiet. That car, a beat up '98 Honda with a cracked windshield and no AC, became my home for the next 3 months. I learned how to shower at gyms and gas stations. I brushed my teeth in the fast food bathrooms. I kept a spiral notebook in the glove compartment where I'd write business ideas, quotes, and what I'd call future headlines. One of them read, "From car to CEO, Ava Green's rise to the top." I still have that page. There were nights I thought about giving up, nights where the hunger gnawed harder than the cold, and the silence in that car felt like it was screaming at me. But every time I reached for that 20 Mama gave me, I'd remember what it stood for: faith. She didn't have much to give, but she gave me that. I wasn't going to waste it. Eventually, I got a part time job at a food truck downtown. The pay was trash, but the owner, a scruffy guy named Dean, didn't ask too many questions. He let me eat leftovers and even slipped me extra cash when he could. I started saving every dollar. No movies, no clothes, no nights out. Just work, eat, and write ideas in that notebook. People passed me every day without seeing me. I was just another broke girl with cracked lips and a fake smile. But in my mind, I was already building. I saw visions of something bigger, something golden, warm, and untouchable. They thought I was surviving. I was planning. And during those 3 brutal months, I learned one thing: hunger is the best architect. The worst kind of doubt isn't from strangers, it's from the people who raised you, the ones who held your hand when you took your first steps, the ones who should know your heart better than anyone else. But sometimes they're the first to turn away. After I finally saved enough from work in the food truck, I managed to rent a tiny studio apartment. And by studio, I mean a glorified closet with peel in paint and a leaky faucet. Still, it felt like progress. I called Mama that first night, expecting her voice to sound proud, maybe even relieved. But she sounded tired. "I just don't want you to get hurt, baby," she said. "You've always had big dreams, but this world doesn't work like that for girls like us." Girls like us. That phrase echoed. It wasn't cruel, but it crushed me more than any insult Heather ever threw my way. Mama wasn't laughing. She was simply defeated. She'd seen too much disappointment in her life to believe in anything bigger. Then came my cousin Nathan, who called to check in, but spent most of the call reminding me that success was for people with money, degrees, and connections. "You're not in a fairy tale, Ava," he chuckled. "You've got grit, sure, but that don't pay the rent." Even my older brother Caleb, the one person I thought might get it, told me to come home and get real. He offered to ask around at the local lumber yard, said he could maybe pull some strings to get me on the schedule. That was his version of support, dragging me back to the same town that spit on me. I didn't tell them about the notebook, about the late nights I stayed up watching business videos, learning marketing terms, and sketching out product ideas I couldn't afford to make yet. I didn't tell them how I'd practiced pitching fake investors in the mirror, or how I'd written out a 3 year plan even though I didn't have a dollar to my name, because I knew what they'd say: that I was wasting time, that I was chasing shadows. So I stopped calling, I stopped explaining. I didn't need their belief, I needed their silence. See, people think support means cheering you on, but sometimes the only support you get is from the silence between criticism, the space where you learn to clap for yourself. I taped a sticky note above my mattress that read, "You're not crazy, you're early." That's what I repeated to myself every night when my bank account dropped below $10, when a new rejection email popped up, when another customer ignored me at the food truck. No one believed in me, but I did, and honestly, that was enough, at least for now. It wasn't even a full dollar. It was 3 quarters, 2 dimes, and a nickel, 85 cents shoved into my palm by a woman who didn't have exact change. "Keep it," she said with a distracted smile, juggling 2 kids in a diaper bag. "For your hustle." That was the first time someone used that word for me. Hustle, not struggle, not trying. Hustle, it stuck with me. I was selling iced coffee in front of a busted up thrift store, using a folding table I found in a dumpster and a borrowed cooler. No permits, no official anything. Just some dollar store cups, hand drawn signs, and a dream I hadn't yet learned to articulate. And on that hot July afternoon, I made $23.10 in total. It was more than just cash, it was proof. It was air in my lungs again. I went home, dumped the coins and crumpled bills onto my mattress, and stared at them like they were sacred. I didn't spend that money. I taped the first dollar bill I earned, not the largest, just the first, to my wall. Then I wrote next to it in black marker, day one of the life they said I couldn't have. That tiny success was addictive. It made me start seeing the world differently. Every empty lot looked like a potential storefront. Every passerby felt like a future customer. I started sketching designs for a drink cart I couldn't afford yet. I watched hours of YouTube videos on branding, flavor profiles, and street marketing. I fell asleep listening to podcasts about building small empires from sidewalk stands. And that's when the vision came. I didn't just want to sell coffee. I wanted to build an experience, something clean, bright, and modern, a mobile coffee bar that made people feel important, even if all they bought was a $2 latte. I wanted to name it something bold, something unapologetic, and after scribbling names for a week, I landed on it. GRIT, simple, strong, unshakable. That night, I sketched the logo, a blocky black font with a gold underline. I imagined it on paper cups, t-shirts, trucks, billboards. I imagined it being so big, people would whisper it the way they whispered Starbucks in the 90s. I had nothing. No startup capital, no truck, no investors, just a dream and a name. But I also had something else, momentum. The next morning, I woke up early, walked 2 miles to the bus stop, and started knocking on the doors of every event space, flea market, and parking lot owner who might let me sell coffee on their property for free. Most said no. A few didn't even open the door. But one woman, a florist named Marlene, said, "Sure, honey, as long as you don't block the entrance." That weekend, I set up my table again, and this time I made $48. It still wasn't much, but I felt rich, not in my wallet, but in my bones. Because now I had something no one could take away from me, a first dollar and a clear vision. The truth is, most days, no one stopped. I'd show up at sunrise with my foldable table, a dented thermos, and a smile I had to fake more times than I care to admit. I'd wipe down the surface, align the cups just right, light a candle for scent, cinnamon vanilla because it reminded me of home, and wait, and wait, and wait. Some mornings, I'd see hundreds of people pass me by, mothers holding toddlers, office workers with earbuds, runners drenched in sweat. No one looked twice. No one asked what I was selling. They just moved on, like I was part of the sidewalk. I started to take it personal. I'd lie awake at night staring at the ceiling of my little studio, wondering if they were right, if I was just playing pretend, if the dream I carried was too big for someone like me. One day, after 6 hours in the sun with only $4.75 in tips and one pity purchase, I packed up early. My legs hurt, my throat was dry. I hadn't eaten since the night before. I remember sitting on the curb next to my stand, my back pressed against a brick wall, holding that cup of untouched coffee like it might tell me something. Across the street was a trendy cafe, clean, sleek, expensive. They had music playing, baristas wearing black aprons, and a line out the door. I stared at them like I was watching a movie I wasn't invited to star in. I started crying, silently, angry, embarrassed tears. That's when a homeless man walked by. He looked at me, then at my setup, and said, "Rough day?" I nodded. He smiled, toothless but kind. "You showed up. That's more than most do." He kept walking. Those 5 words stuck with me. You showed up. Not you sold, not you succeeded, just showed up. So I kept doing it. I began tracking foot traffic. What times were busiest? Who passed by? I started moving the table closer to bus stops. I offered free samples, just sips, in little Dixie cups. I talked to everyone. Even when they ignored me, I smiled and said, "Have a beautiful day." People started recognizing me. "Hey, you were here yesterday, right? You're the coffee girl. You still trying, huh?" Yes, I was. Slowly, painfully, people started stopping. Not many, but a few, enough to make me believe the stand wasn't invisible, that maybe I wasn't either. I learned something during that phase. Visibility doesn't come from shouting louder, it comes from consistency, from showing up, even when the world turns its back. I wasn't just selling coffee, I was building a name, brick by invisible brick. And someday I told myself they wouldn't walk past me, they'd line up. When I posted my first flyer on the community board of a laundromat, I was proud. It was hand cut, printed on cheap neon paper, with a photo of my stand and the words "Grit Coffee," built on hustle, served with heart. I even taped a little quote at the bottom: "Success is brewed daily." I stood there admiring it for a second, like it was a masterpiece in a gallery. Then I walked outside and kept hustling. A few days later, a girl I went to high school with messaged me on social media. Her name was Carly. She used to hang out with Heather and the other girls who wore boutique clothes while I wore Goodwill hand-me-downs. Her message read, "Saw your coffee thing. Kinda cute, like a lemonade stand for grown-ups." I stared at that message for a long time. Cute. Lemonade stand, like it was a child's fantasy, like I was playing business instead of building one. I didn't respond. I didn't delete it either. I screenshotted it and saved it in a folder I named Fuel. Carly wasn't the only one. People I used to know, from school, from the diner, from church, they'd pop up out of nowhere to poke fun, disguised as support. Still doing that little coffee hustle. "I heard you're out selling in the heat. That can't be safe. Don't you want to like do something real?" Something real. As if waking up at 4:30 a.m., hauling gallons of coffee by bus, negotiating with parking lot owners, designing my own signs, building a brand from absolute zero, as if that wasn't real enough. I didn't argue, I didn't explain, I just kept showing up. Because while they were laughing, I was learning. I figured out how to price for profit, not just survival. I learned what flavors people craved and which ones bombed. I tracked my busiest times and moved my stand to follow the traffic. I started posting on Instagram daily, even if no one liked the posts at first. I experimented with branding, gold cups, bold fonts, little handwritten notes on sleeves that said things like, "You're stronger than your coffee." And customers noticed. One morning, a man in a navy suit stopped and said, "You're the grit girl. My wife's obsessed with your lavender brew. Said it's the only thing keeping her sane this week." That was the day I knew this wasn't just a stand anymore. It was a story, a brand, a feeling. They called it a joke. I called it a start. And every business they laughed at before it made money started exactly like this, with doubt, with ridicule, with people who thought they knew better. But I wasn't building this for them. I was building it because of them. It was a Tuesday. I remember that because it had rained the night before, and the sidewalk still shimmered like glass in the morning light. Business had been slow all week, and I was already down to my last $16, enough for some instant oats and bus fare. I almost didn't set up that day. My hands were shaking from lack of sleep, and my head throbbed from the cheap instant coffee I'd been drinking to save inventory. But I showed up anyway. Around 9 a.m., a tall man in a gray overcoat walked by. His suit was pressed, his shoes clean, and he had the kind of posture that screamed old money. He didn't stop, just glanced at the stand and kept walking. 15 minutes later, he came back. "Is this you?" he asked, pointing at the hand-lettered sign that said GRITCOFFEE, founded by Ava Green. "Yes, sir," I said, brushing my hair behind my ear like it mattered. He looked around. "Where's your team?" I let out a short laugh. "You're looking at it." He smiled faintly, then ordered a black coffee. I handed it to him, nervous I'd spill it or say something stupid. He took a sip and paused. "This is good." That was it. No over-the-top praise, no big gestures, just good. But something about the way he said it, measured, quiet, almost surprised, made my spine straighten. He came back the next day. This time he brought a friend, a woman in a pencil skirt and heels. They stood near the stand for 20 minutes, drinking and whispering while watching the foot traffic. By the third visit, I asked his name. "Winslow," he said. "Garrett Winslow. I own the building around the corner." My throat tightened. That building was massive, an old warehouse being renovated into retail units. I'd daydreamed about it once or twice, but never let myself think too far ahead. "I like your branding," he added. "Your hustle. You remind me of my daughter when she started her first venture." I didn't know what to say, so I said thank you about 4 times in a row. A week later, he handed me a business card. "I've got an open kiosk space in the lobby, rent's reasonable. I think you do well there." I stared at the card like it was made of gold. I didn't have the money for rent. I didn't even have enough for a proper espresso machine. But when he walked away, I looked at the corner of the card where he had scribbled a note. "Call me. I'll help you figure it out." I stood there heart pounding, not just from the opportunity, but from the realization that someone finally saw me. Not as a joke, not as a poor girl playing entrepreneur, but as a woman with potential. Meeting Mr. Winslow didn't make me rich overnight, but it cracked the door open, and I had every intention of kicking it wide. Selling sounds easy when your stomach is full, when you're well rested, hydrated, and dressed in something that doesn't cling to your ribs or reek of old sweat. But when you're hungry, really hungry, it changes you. It sharpens your instincts, dulls your shame, and teaches you to chase opportunity like a dog chases meat. When Mr. Winslow offered me that kiosk space, I knew I couldn't afford it. But I also knew this might be my only shot to move from the sidewalk into something permanent, something real. So I said yes, and then I panicked. I had 2 weeks before the lease started, and I needed $2,000 just to get in the door. That might as well have been a million to me. I had $41 in my account and 3 half-used loyalty punch cards from local diners. No credit, no savings, no backup. So I started selling like my life depended on it because it did. I made a new sign that said, "Grit Coffee, help a dream move indoors." I offered pay what you can days. I sold little thank you cards with gold lettering that read, "You believed in me before the doors opened." People loved that. I posted my story online, raw and unfiltered. How I started from a folding table, how I slept in my car, how this kiosk could change everything. I added a small donation link just in case. I woke up at 4 a.m. and stayed until dark. I skipped lunch most days so I could buy extra paper cups. My knees ached from standing, my lips cracked from windburn, but I hustled harder than ever. Not because I wanted to prove them wrong, but because I wanted to prove myself right. And then something wild happened. People showed up. A woman from Instagram drove 30 miles just to hand me a $50 tip. A local college student asked if she could volunteer for a day. A man in a BMW rolled down his window and said, "I saw your flyer. My wife said we need to support women who grind." Within 10 days, I had raised $1,347. Still not enough. But now I wasn't alone. I met with Mr. Winslow again, explained everything. I expected him to pull the offer, to smile politely and send me back to the street. Instead, he leaned back in his leather chair and said, "You made that much in 10 days?" "Yes, sir," I said, selling like I was starving. He nodded. "Good, hunger is underrated." Then he handed me a new agreement with deferred rent for the first month. That night, I sat on the floor of my studio and ate a can of beans with a plastic spoon. But I didn't feel poor. I felt unstoppable because I had just learned the most important rule of entrepreneurship. People don't buy your product, they buy your fight. And mine? It was just beginning. People think revenge is loud, explosive, screamed across a courtroom, or served cold in some dramatic scene. But the kind I was building, it was slow, silent, baked into every decision I made. By the time I opened my kiosk inside Mr. Winslow's building, I wasn't just serving coffee, I was crafting legacy. Every gold labeled cup I handed out, every smile I wore like armor, was layered with something deeper than caffeine or customer service. It was remembrance. I remembered Heather's voice in that classroom, dripping with sarcasm. I remembered Carly's lemonade stand comment. I remembered the way my own brother said, "Come home, Ava, be realistic." And with every small win, a returning customer, a glowing review, a full tip jar, I whispered inside, "This is for you." It's funny how success looks from the outside. People saw me in that marble floored lobby behind a sleek black counter with my GRIT logo shining above me in gold foil. They thought I was lucky. They thought some rich man had discovered me, plucked me from the streets like a fairy tale. They didn't see the nights I cried into cold ramen. They didn't see the rejection emails, the sleep deprived mornings, the part of my brain that never stopped calculating risk. They didn't see how I sacrificed relationships, birthdays, even meals to make this thing breathe. Because it wasn't just a business, it was justice. Every time someone told me, "You're such an inspiration," I smiled, nodded, said thank you. But in my mind, I wasn't trying to inspire. I was trying to erase the memory of every time they made me feel small. One day, a group of former classmates walked in, all of them dressed in designer clothes, still dripping with the kind of casual cruelty they had back in school. They didn't recognize me at first. "Is this place new?" one of them asked, glancing around. I nodded. "Welcome to GRIT." They scanned the menu. One of them joked, "It's expensive for a kiosk, isn't it?" I leaned in slightly. "You're not just paying for the coffee, you're paying for the fire behind it." She looked confused. I didn't clarify. After they ordered and left, I stood there shaken, not with fear, but with power, because I realized something vital that day. I wasn't chasing success, I was chasing closure. And every cup I sold brought me one step closer. My name was no longer a whisper in a high school hallway. It was a brand, a movement, a warning. I didn't just want to prove them wrong. I wanted to make sure they could never forget they were. 3 years of pouring coffee, pouring sweat, and pouring everything I had into something no one thought would work. But suddenly, without warning, the town that once ignored me, the town that laughed, started to turn its head. It began with a feature in the Nashville Tribune. A lifestyle reporter named Lydia popped into Grit one weekday morning, ordered a honey cinnamon cold brew, and sat quietly in the corner with a laptop. I didn't even know who she was. We talked for less than 5 minutes. 2 weeks later, I woke up to 64 missed notifications and 3 voicemails, all before 7 a.m. The article headline read, "From Trailer to Trademark, the woman behind GRIT, coffee is changing the game." My face was there, smiling awkwardly, wearing a gold grit apron in front of my kiosk. The article told my story in the car, the folding table, the hunger, the dream. It painted me as this underdog hero, a local success born from stubbornness and struggle. By noon that day, the line at my kiosk wrapped around the building. Strangers started tagging GRIT on social media. Influencers came in for the vibes. Local vendors wanted to collaborate. I was invited to speak at a women's entrepreneurship panel. Me, the girl who once Googled how to talk like a CEO just to sound like I belonged. Then, something I never expected happened. I got a call from East Hickory. It was a Chamber of Commerce. They were planning their annual Hometown Hero series and wanted to invite me back to speak, to inspire the next generation of small town dreamers. The same town that once told me girls like me don't get rich was now offering me a stage. At first, I laughed. Then I cried, not because I needed their praise, but because I no longer needed their permission. I agreed to come, but not for applause. I wanted them to see what they'd buried, what they'd mocked. I wanted Heather to see the headlines. I wanted my old teachers to sip my coffee and wonder how they got it so wrong. The night before the event, I walked the streets of East Hickory for the first time in years. The sidewalks looked smaller, the buildings older, but I didn't feel small anymore. I passed the school where they laughed in my face, the diner where I washed dishes after class, the church where I once prayed for a way out. I stopped in front of Heather's family's boutique, still standing, still overcharging for jeans made overseas. I didn't go in. I just smiled, turned around, and whispered to myself, they notice me now. But the truth was, I'd already noticed myself, and that was the real victory. There was a time I stood in line at the back of the Save Mart, clutching food stamps and pretending not to notice the people pretending not to notice me. I remember hiding peanut butter behind a can of beans so no one would see that bright blue government-issued EBT card in my hand. I remember praying the total wouldn't go over by a single dollar. I remember the cashier's pity. That memory clung to me like a bruise, invisible but always aching. So when I was invited to my first fundraising dinner, sitting beside city council members and local CEOs in a chandelier-lit ballroom, eating salmon with tiny gold forks, I couldn't help but look down at the linen napkin on my lap and think, what am I doing here? I wasn't used to this world. The designer dresses, the casual wine talk, the way people threw around terms like capital returns and investment tiers like they were flavors on a menu. I was still the girl who once counted coins to buy powdered milk. But now I was also the woman on the cover of Southern Visionaries Weekly, the founder of GRIT, the name on everyone's lips. That night, I was being honored as a keynote speaker for an initiative supporting female-owned startups in under-resourced neighborhoods. They asked me to tell my story. I walked up to the podium in heels I could finally afford, wearing a black blazer I bought secondhand, but had tailored to fit me like power. I looked out at a sea of faces, polished, wealthy, curious, and I told them about the trailer, the food stamps, the car I slept in, the jokes, the failure, the fire. I told them about the folding table, the candles, the man who said, "You showed up." And then I told them this: you can't teach grit, you survive it, you wear it, and one day, if you're lucky, you serve it with ice and espresso. There was silence at first, and then a standing ovation. Afterward, a man in a navy suit and cufflinks walked over and said, "You speak like someone who's lost everything." I smiled. That's because I have. He handed me his card, Angel Investor, just 2 words. But in that moment, they felt heavier than gold. From that dinner, I raised enough money to open a second grit location, this time not in a kiosk, but in a real brick and mortar cafe. White tile walls, polished wood counters, gold trim on every menu board. My mama cried when she saw it. She whispered, I always knew you were meant for more. And for the first time, I believed her. I went from hiding in grocery store aisles to having my name printed on table place cards beside senators and CEOs. But no matter how many dinners I was invited to, I never forgot the cold taste of canned soup. I never stopped seeing the girl with shaking hands and a fake smile, because she's the one who got me here. The message came through my assistant. I have someone named Heather Collins asking for a meeting, she said. I froze. Heather Collins. The same Heather who laughed in my face at 17. The same Heather who once said, Ava can't even afford lunch. She thinks she's going to be rich. I hadn't heard her name in years, but suddenly, there it was, floating in my inbox like a ghost with lipstick and a smile. I said yes. She walked into the cafe 2 days later like she owned the place, still tall, still blonde, still dressed like a boutique window mannequin. But her smile wasn't cruel this time. It was calculated. I see you've really made something of yourself, she said, glancing around my flagship grit cafe with a tone that tried to sound impressed, but couldn't quite hide the surprise. I offered her a seat. She ordered a coffee. I made it myself. Black, no sugar, just like old times when she drank everything bitter and spit out anything sweet. And then she got to the point. My father's looking to invest in local brands, she said. We're building a hospitality arm under his company, and GRIT has great bones. You've done well, Ava, but with the right backing, you could scale, go national, maybe even franchise. She slid a manila folder across the table. Inside, a formal offer. 7 figures, buyout, full control. Grit would become a sub-brand under Collins Heritage Group. They'd rebrand, streamline. Polish the messaging, she called it. I read it twice, not because I was tempted, but because I couldn't believe how blind she was. She thought GRIT was a product. She didn't realize it was personal. This wasn't just a business I built. It was my blood on the floor, my cold nights, my bus rides, my journal full of quotes and vengeance. GRIT wasn't a brand. It was me. I slid the folder back. No, I said simply. She blinked. No? I didn't build this so someone like you could slap your family's name on it and sell it back to people like me. She laughed awkwardly, like she wasn't used to hearing no. Ava, this is more money than you've ever seen. I leaned forward, my voice steady. Heather, you once told me I'd never be rich, and now here you are, trying to buy the thing that made me rich. She didn't respond. She just stared, suddenly realizing she wasn't the one in control anymore. I stood up, smoothed my apron, and said, You don't get to buy grit, you earn it. And you? You never had any. As she left, folder untouched, coffee half sipped, I felt no anger, just a strange, hollow sort of peace. She didn't come to help me grow. She came to own the narrative. But that story, it was already carved in gold, and she'd never be able to afford it. 2 weeks after Heather walked out of my cafe, a letter arrived at my office, not an email, not a text. A real letter, ivory envelope, gold seal, my name written in perfect cursive like it belonged on a wedding invitation. At first I thought it was junk. Then I noticed the return address, Collins Heritage Group. Inside was a handwritten note on thick stationery. No logos, no business terms, just a personal message. From Heather. Ava, you don't owe me a response, but I owe you a few things, an explanation, a truth, maybe even an apology. I never thought you'd make it. And that wasn't just arrogance, it was fear. You reminded me of everything I couldn't be: brave, relentless, real. I grew up with comfort. You grew up with fire. And now I realize fire builds things that comfort never could. I was cruel to you in high school because I could be, because people like me always assume people like you will stay beneath us. And I see now I was wrong. What you built, GRIT, it's not just coffee, it's defiance in a cup. It's a mirror to every girl who's ever been told she's not enough. And I respect the hell out of that. I won't try to buy you again. I won't try to copy you. I just wanted you to know I see you now. I really do. Heather, I read it twice, then three more times. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just sat there in my office chair, staring out the window at the city that once swallowed me whole. I thought about all the moments I dreamed of revenge, the days I whispered her name under my breath like a curse, the nights I imagined what I'd say if I ever had the upper hand. And now here it was. But what I felt wasn't satisfaction. It wasn't even victory. It was something softer, sadder, like looking at the ruins of a house you no longer wanted to live in. Heather's words didn't change who she was back then, but they changed who I was now. Not a girl screaming to be seen, not a woman chasing validation, but a force, unshaken, unpurchased, whole. I took the letter, folded it carefully, and placed it in a box in my desk labeled Start. In that same box was my original flyer, a photo of my folding table, and the first dollar I ever made taped to a napkin. They were reminders, not of struggle, but of becoming. That letter didn't rewrite my story, it sealed it. And now that chapter, that hunger, that hurt, could finally rest, because the girl they once laughed at had nothing left to prove. Some people buy luxury cars when they make their first million. Others take a vacation, or invest in stocks, or build dream houses on the coast. Me? I bought the lot next to Heather Collins' house. It wasn't revenge in the traditional sense. There was no confrontation, no announcement, no ribbon cutting ceremony. I didn't do it for drama. I did it for closure. The property had sat empty for years. A half-acre plot with overgrown grass, rotting fence posts, and a for sale sign so faded it looked more like a warning than an invitation. But the moment I saw the address on the listing, something clicked. 314 Larkspur Lane. Heather's house was 316. At first, I told myself it was a business move, prime real estate in an affluent zip code, good potential for a satellite location or a private office. But deep down, I knew what it really was. It was a message, not shouted, not spiteful, just engraved. I didn't call a realtor. I called the seller directly and made an all cash offer. No negotiations, no contingencies. It closed in 10 days. The day the sale went public, I got a text. Unknown number. Is this your idea of a joke? I stared at the screen. I didn't reply. Instead, I drove out to the property myself, pulled up in my black electric SUV, stepped out in gold trim boots, and walked the boundary line. Heather's backyard was partially visible through a row of untrimmed hedges. I saw a swing set, a marble patio, a silver wind chime. I heard the faint sound of a dog barking. I stood there for a full minute soaking in the quiet. Then I took a gold Sharpie from my coat pocket and knelt down next to the mailbox post, the one that would eventually hold my own. On the wooden beam, I wrote in small capital letters, "You'll never be rich." The girl next door. Then I stood, smiled to myself, and drove away. I never told the press. I never posted about it online. I didn't need applause. The point wasn't to destroy her. The point was to exist beside her, louder, stronger, undeniable. The girl she once mocked now lived in her blind spot, and every time she looked out her window at that empty lot slowly transforming into something bold and golden, she'd remember not just what she said, but who she said it to. I didn't plan it that way, not at first. When I bought the lot next to Heather's house, it was symbolic, a statement made in gold ink and silent footsteps. But what came next? That was just business. Cold, calculated, and entirely legal. Heather's family boutique, Collins and Lace, had been the pride of East Hickory for over 20 years. Designer clothes, overpriced candles, silk everything. It catered to the kind of woman Heather always believed she was: elite, exclusive, untouchable. But times were changing. Online brands were eating their market. Trends moved faster than her outdated racks. And Grit, now a lifestyle brand, not just coffee, had just launched its own limited run clothing line. Durable, bold, minimalist fashion for women who moved. And guess what? Our distribution center needed a retail presence in East Hickory. So when the landlord of the building Collins and Lace was leasing decided to sell, guess who made the highest offer? Not a company, not a corporation. Me, Ava Green. Heather didn't even know I was the buyer until the ink had dried. She stormed into my cafe 3 days later, face red, fingers shaking. "You bought the building," she hissed. I nodded. "I did." "You're kicking us out?" "I'm repurposing the space," I said calmly. "Grit East Hickory is launching in 6 weeks." She stared at me like she didn't recognize the woman in front of her, because she didn't. She was still looking for the trailer girl with patched jeans and shy eyes, but that girl was gone. "This is personal," she snapped. "No," I replied, locking eyes with her. "This is business. You built a brand that excluded people like me. I'm building one that includes them, and they chose me." She left without another word, no threats, no tears, just a heavy silence that lingered in the air long after she was gone. 6 weeks later, the Collins and Lace sign came down, and in its place, GRIT, made to last. We hosted a block party for the grand opening. Free drinks, live music, booths with local vendors. Hundreds showed up. Some remembered me, some didn't. It didn't matter. What mattered was the space, the shift. Where once stood overpriced linen and judgmental glances, now stood community, energy, belonging. I didn't dance that night. I didn't raise a glass or make a speech. I just stood in the back, arms crossed, eyes on the crowd. And I whispered to myself, "You didn't destroy her. You outgrew her. And that was the real win." People talk about gold like it's eternal, untarnishable, the ultimate proof of success. They say it never rusts, never fades, never lies. That's why we wear it on our fingers when we promise forever. That's why we chase it when we think we've made it. But what they don't tell you is this: gold might not rust, but it reminds, and memories burn. I had a gold plaque made for the new GRIT headquarters, not big, just subtle enough to catch the light when you walked in. Brushed metal, sleek edges etched in the center, in bold block letters were the exact words that started it all. "You'll never be rich." I had them engraved, not as a joke, not as a punchline, but as a truth I carried for too long, a sentence that lived in my ribs. That phrase was my ghost, my gasoline, my gospel. But now, looking at it mounted beside mahogany walls and polished floors, it felt lighter. It didn't hurt the same, because the burn was no longer on the inside. It was on display, owned, controlled, reframed. Still, I couldn't lie. Sometimes the past whispered. Late at night, alone in my penthouse, staring out at the city skyline, I'd feel it creep in. The trailer, the car, the hunger, a scent, a sound, a random name in a newspaper. And suddenly I was 17 again, gripping notebook pages like life preservers, praying for a future that didn't laugh back. Even now, with money in the bank and employees with 401ks, I sometimes wonder if they were right about one thing, that I would always carry the girl who wasn't invited to the table. But then I remember I built the damn table, and if you build it right, if you build it out of something real, grit, pain, ambition, silence, then it doesn't need validation. It just needs legs strong enough to hold the weight of what came before it. So I kept that plaque on the wall, not to taunt them, but to honor her, the girl who kept going, even when she had no map, no mentor, no mercy. Gold doesn't rust, and I've learned to live with the fire. Let the memories burn. Let them crackle in the background like old film reels. Because from those ashes, I forged something untouchable, something they could never buy, break, or erase. Words are funny things. You carry them, you replay them, you chew on them in silence for years. But when the moment finally comes, the one where you can finally speak, finally say everything you rehearsed in your head, you realize you don't need to, because sometimes a single image, a single gesture, a single line carved in steel says it all. It was the night before our East Hickory flagship cafe was set to open, the one that replaced Heather's old boutique. The space was glowing with soft lighting, fresh white paint, polished oak floors. Our logo was already up, shining in matte, black and gold, framed by tall glass windows that looked out onto the quiet street. But there was one final touch. I stood outside, holding a small rectangular brass plate in my hand. It wasn't large, maybe 6 inches wide, 2 inches tall, but it had weight, both physical and emotional. The engraving was simple, clean, unapologetic. To the ones who said I never would, thank you for the fire. No names, no accusations, no need. I bolted it into the stone wall by the entrance, right at eye level, not too loud, but impossible to miss. Heather would see it. Her friends would see it. My old teachers, my cousins, every single person who ever rolled their eyes when I said I had dreams bigger than our town could hold. They'd walk past it, maybe even pretend not to notice, but they'd feel it. I was sure of that. It wasn't revenge, not anymore. It was release. The next morning before the ribbon cutting, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the cafe window. Standing straight, gold-trimmed blazer, hair pulled back, shoulders still a little scarred but steady. Behind me, that plaque caught the sunrise. It gleamed like a promise kept. One of my baristas, a 19-year-old girl named Riley, asked about it. "Who's it for?" I looked at her, young, hungry, fire in her voice, and smiled. "It's for everyone who thought I was a joke, and for every girl they tried to silence." She nodded, didn't ask again. She didn't need to, because some engravings aren't just metal. They're memories you claim, wounds you turn into armor, stories you etch into stone, not to relive the pain, but to show you survived it. That plaque, it didn't speak with volume, but it said everything I never could. The invitations were digital, limited, and intentional. A curated list of community leaders, young entrepreneurs, my staff, and the very customers who kept me going when grit was just a dream on a sidewalk. But some people came anyway. They weren't on the list. They didn't RSVP. They didn't even try to hide behind excuses. They just showed up, like ghosts who hadn't realized they were no longer haunting me. Heather was one of them. So was Carly, the one who once called my business a lemonade stand for grown-ups. Mr. Pollard, my high school economics teacher, who smirked when I said I wanted to be an entrepreneur, walked in wearing a forced smile and a too-tight tie. Even my cousin Nathan came, the same one who once said, "Success isn't for people like us." And just like that, the opening became something else, not just a celebration, but a reckoning. They wandered through the space like tourists in a country they never believed existed, admiring the sleek countertops, the industrial chic lighting, the display wall of grit merchandise that now sold nationwide. I watched from the upper balcony, a glass of sparkling cider in hand, catching glimpses of them peering at the engraved plaque by the entrance. Some stopped and stared, some didn't, but every single one of them felt it. I could tell. The speeches began around noon. I was the final one to speak. As I took the mic, applause erupted, not out of politeness, but power. I looked around at the crowd, some familiar, some new, and then my eyes locked on Heather. She stood in the back, arms folded, expression unreadable. I didn't mention names, I didn't call out the past. Instead, I said this: grit was built not from privilege, but from pressure, from being told no, from being laughed at, from hearing again and again that I wasn't enough. And still, we rose. Applause, louder this time. To anyone who's ever been underestimated, welcome. This place is yours too. And to those who underestimated us, thank you. You gave us the spark. When I stepped down, I walked through the crowd, smiling, shaking hands, hugging those who mattered. I passed Carly. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. I passed Mr. Pollard. He simply nodded, eyes low. And then I passed Heather. She didn't speak, but I saw it in her eyes, the flicker of something that looked like grief. Not because I succeeded, but because she had the chance to grow with me and chose to laugh instead. They all came to watch. What they didn't realize was this wasn't a show. It was the final act of a story I wrote with my own hands, in coffee stains, calluses, and quiet revenge. And this time, they didn't get to write the ending. It was days after the grand opening. The buzz had quieted. The articles were published, the photos circulated. The congratulations trickled in like distant echoes of something already complete. I was in the cafe alone, early morning, reviewing invoices and sipping the first brew of the day. The sun hadn't fully risen, and the gold-accented logo on the front window cast its soft glow across the floor. The space was still, peaceful, the kind of calm that only exists when the storm is finally over. That's when she walked in, Heather, no entourage, no clipboard, no perfect posture, just her jeans, a plain sweatshirt, hair pulled back, no makeup. She looked human, not defeated, but different, smaller than the version of her that once ruled high school halls and boutique windows. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. She approached the counter slowly, eyes scanning the walls like she was searching for a trace of the world she once knew. When she finally met my gaze, she asked quietly, "Why?" It wasn't hostile, it wasn't performative, it was honest. I placed my coffee down and leaned forward, elbows on the countertop. "You mean, why did I build this?" I asked. She shook her head slightly. I mean, why here? Why the lot? Why the plaque? Why me?" For a moment, I considered giving her the line I'd rehearsed for years. Something about vengeance, about proving a point, about the poetry of returning to the place I was broken and building an empire on top of the ruins. But what came out instead was quieter, truer, because you made me feel small. And for a long time, I believed you. I believed I wasn't smart enough, rich enough, worthy enough. And I had to unlearn that lie, brick by brick, dollar by dollar. Every time I poured a cup of coffee, I was pouring a little more belief into myself. She stared at me, blinking hard. "So this is revenge?" I shook my head. "Number it was, at first, but now, it's reflection, it's growth, it's proof that your words didn't kill me. They grew me." She looked away then, biting her lip. I used to think people like you just got lucky, she said. But now I know you were just willing to bleed longer. There was nothing left to say, and for the first time in our lives, silence didn't feel like something broken. It felt like something healed. She nodded once, turned, and walked out. No tears, no hug, no final word, just the echo of a question she never thought she'd have to ask. And the answer that changed everything. The last time I saw Heather, she didn't say goodbye. She walked out of Grit's East Hickory flagship the same way she used to walk past me in the school hallways. Chin high, eyes unreadable, heart locked away. But this time something had changed. I wasn't the girl on the outside looking in. I was the woman on the inside who built the door. A week passed. Then two. I thought that chapter was finally closed until I received one last message, a simple envelope left on the front counter by an unnamed delivery driver. Inside was a card, no logo, no monogram, just four handwritten words. You were always enough, and underneath scribbled almost like an afterthought. H. I stared at it for a long time, not because it brought tears, those had dried years ago, but because it felt like the last brick being laid in the foundation I'd spent my entire life building. I didn't write back. I didn't need to. Instead, I walked into the back room, opened the safe, and pulled out a small black box. Inside was the original sticky note, yellowed, creased, and still boldly inked. You'll never be rich. I smiled, not bitterly, not triumphantly, just peacefully. Because the truth was I had become rich, but not just in money, not just in storefronts or staff or investment portfolios. I was rich in something deeper, something they could never calculate on a spreadsheet. I was rich in resilience, in every sleepless night that didn't kill me, in every rejection that redirected me, in every cruel word that became my kindling. Heather gave me the match, but I built the fire. So if she ever wonders, years from now, staring at a plaque she pretends not to see, hearing the name GRIT whispered in the business schools, printed on reusable cups, worn on sweatshirts by girls who look like I once did, if she ever wonders how I did it, I hope she remembers what I said when she asked me why. You made me rich. Not with money, but with reason, with fight, with fuel. With a mirror I had to shatter to finally see my own reflection clearly. This wasn't just my story, it was the story of everyone who's ever been underestimated, dismissed, or quietly broken. And now I own every piece of it. In gold, in grit, forever.